to what you see on the screen, I just want to say that Reverend Nash had pastored the Michigan Street Baptist Church for almost 50 years before the start of World War II. So he already had a history of being a servant in the community and of keeping correspondence, not just with soldiers, but with other attendees of the church, whether they were on vacation or going out of town for jobs. Everything was kept there.
Thanks, Sharon. So tonight, I think everyone was really excited. I know that I was when we actually came across information about the correspondence between the soldiers and Reverend Nash. It really provided us with an insight as to what the experience was like for the soldiers. And there's a few of the letters that we read that were really impactful as they expressed what the experience was like being in the military. But before we get into talking about the letters and reading a few of them for you tonight, I wanted to just give you a sense overall of what the experience was like for Black soldiers during World War II. So the draft was started in 1940. We know that the United States didn't get involved in the war in terms of sending troops until Pearl Harbor was bombed in 1941. But African Americans were allowed to sign up for the draft. Now, African Americans have served in the military starting from the Revolutionary War, but always in segregated units. And so the same was happening in World War II, that the units were segregated. And the troops that when the soldiers signed up, they weren't in combat units. They were in like supplying or in the supply lines, all of that front end stuff to support the troops versus really being in combat. But right from the beginning, the Black press in particular played a huge role in really putting pressure on Roosevelt's government to change that. And with the exception of some units, we've heard about the Tuskegee Airmen. I also learned in looking at this that there was a battalion troop like tanks. They were called the 761, and they were part of the Battle of the Bulge that really helped General Patton to win that battle. And that battle was really a key in bringing down the Germans. And they served at the front line for a much longer period of time. But there were soldiers that were in the battle and in the war. Now, African Americans did not start to really go on the front line to the last year of the war because of the casualties that were being taken by the white soldiers, and also because of the pressure that the Black press in particular was putting on the government to allow the Black soldiers to serve. And as a matter of fact, when the Black press was putting that pressure on, they created what they called the double V. So it wasn't only victory against the Nazis and the Japanese and to restore democracy in the world, but it also stood for victory at home to knock down discrimination and racism. But yet, and also to be noted, when they were serving and they were going through training, many of the military bases were in the South. So you can imagine what their experience was like. For some of the young soldiers going there to train, they were in segregated units. At times, they were treated even worse than prisoners of war. They were harassed. They were treated like they weren't Americans. But yet, and when you hear their voices in these letters, they were performing their duty. There was not one person that I think in these letters complained. They were there being patriotic and doing what we have always done, believing in our country, sacrificing our lives. And the community that was always formed in the church, that was led by Reverend Nash, his wife, the members of the church, you can see that clearly, and that support helped these young men to do what was necessary. So as I mentioned, there were 1.2 African Americans that served in World War II. And although we often we know about the Tuskegee Airmen and some of the other special units, they really served in all branches of the military.
Can I just add too that there were also women who served in World War II, not in combat positions, but many of you have heard of the women who were responsible for getting the mail out to the soldiers who worked there. There were also women who served as nurses for German troops that had been injured or captured in the war. The ironic part about African Americans serving in World War II was the fact that when they returned home in their uniforms, many of them were lynched, beaten, and shot because they dared to wear the uniform of the U.S. Army in the streets. So they were not welcomed as heroes. They were treated as if they were the enemy themselves. May I say something about this?
Go ahead, Sharon.
The scholar Gabriel Smith wrote an article in 2004 that was published in a journal called Afro-Americans in New York Life and History. That journal was published by the Afro-American Historical Association of the Niagara Frontier, an organization that still exists here in Buffalo, founded in 1976 by Dr. Monroe Fordham and other scholars such as Dr. Lillian Williams and many others in the Buffalo area. The work of the journal and the work of the association is to try to publish or make known primary source material of African American history of those on the Western frontier. So the journal is still being published. In fact, the latest issue is on the Tops Massacre, if anyone is interested. But Gabriel Smith used the archives that Reverend Nash had kept, all his letters and correspondence, and was able to put together an article about Reverend Nash's correspondence to the men who were serving in World War II, many of whom were members of his church, but not all of them were members.
Right. Thank you, Sharon. And when I was reading the article, I picked up that it says Reverend Nash as a father figure, that many men writing to him, like you said, not everyone was a member of his church, but they felt some sort of kinship to him, which was really powerful. Being thousands of miles away, they were able to write to him and find that solidarity, so to speak. It was really, really beautiful. And three people that we kind of found in that article that we're going to touch base on is the Wilcox brothers. And we will go to the next slide to just see a few correspondence between them. Here we go.
So in spring of 1943, Leon Wilcox wrote a letter to Reverend Nash, and he discusses the soldiers' innate understanding of the essence of life. He said, "The Lord is the only helping hand to the assurance of living a Christian life or dying a Christian death." And he confessed that he was one of those who did not realize the necessity of religion until he joined the service. And it closed with requests that Reverend and members of the church pray for him. And he also, bid hello to Mrs. Nash and to young Jesse Nash. Many of the letters have a tone of the soldiers really hungering and wanting to hear what was happening back at home while they were away. And there was even a committee formed at the church to send care packages to the soldiers, and the letters were also on review within the church as well, so that other members could also keep up with the soldiers.
So I'll read this briefly as well. It says, "A soldier's letter from Leon Wilcox. On June 16th, 1943, Private Leon Wilcox requested a letter of recommendation from Reverend Nash for entrance into the Army Air Corps Cadet School. Alerting Reverend Nash to his dream that he may someday fly, Leon made the urgency of the recommendation known. Compelling Nash to provide in his time of need, Leon exhorted, 'I know you won't fail me, for I feel in my heart that God through you is behind me. Now the future of my success and happiness depends upon you.'" Such a powerful letter. That was the correspondence here. We can see a brief preview of that. And Reverend Nash's answer, if I can make it out, I'll read a little bit of it. To whom it may concern, I am very glad to bear testimony as to the real worth of the bearer, Mr. Leon Wilcox. I have known him all of his life. Indeed, I married his mother and father. With a great deal of interest and satisfaction, I have watched him grow into manhood. It has been mine to baptize and receive him into the church of which his whole family are members, and of which I have been pastor for 51 years. And that was the response of the small blurb from Reverend Nash when he gave his recommendation for Private Leon Wilcox.
Sharon, did you want to take the next one?
Sharon, we'll give you the next slide here, if you don't mind.
Okay, this is a letter that was written by Private Harry Dover. And in it, he advises his son against joining the service, which I found very interesting. And he reads, "It's none of my business, Reverend Nash, but if I were you, I would try to discourage your son's ambition for the armed forces. It's a hard life at best, and particularly in a young boy whose character has not been subject to the evils of gambling, swearing, drinking, and lewd women such as you come in contact with in any branch of the service. To continue his college degree means a great deal in both civilian life and services." Interestingly enough, Jesse Nash Jr. was in the Korean War. So he did not join in World War II, but he did join the Korean War. And this was a postcard. And these postcards and letters, as was mentioned earlier, were placed on a bulletin board at church, and the soldiers would send their photographs of themselves or their comrades in the service for all the people in the church community to see them, wish them well, or send letters back to them.
Wow. And there were about 40 members of the church who were in World War II. And then here's the response to Private Harry Dover from Reverend Nash. "You are very kind to drop me a card, for I am anxious always to know how things are going with you. But I know you must use your body constantly in the affairs of the Army, but the secret chambers of your heart may be, and I trust will be often occupied with other noble, lofty thoughts also. Harry, as one who is unselfishly interested, you may, I counsel you, to think upon those things that bring most joy to your heart and make you conscious of the fact that God is the source of your security. I shall always remember you when I commune with our Father, for he is still on the throne, ruling the destinies of men. Surely I hope you will keep well in mind, in body, mind, and spirit. Let me have a line from you wherever it is convenient to do so. I am as ever sincerely your friend, Reverend Nash."
And as we move on to the next slide, I feel like I should definitely read this small piece from Private William Gregory. And this actually is a response from Reverend Nash to Private Gregory's letter. And I'll read the highlighted part here on the screen. It says, "In the beginning of your letter, you write, 'I have not forgotten you or your church.' But let me make this correction. I have not forgotten you nor our church. For that is the way we like to have our boys feel, who have gone out from Michigan Avenue Baptist Church, that this is their church, and any shall continue to be as long as they are on earth. On earth, we are the church militant, and in the beyond, we shall be the church triumphant. We'll so much for that. We are not so much bothered as it might seem about technicalities, but we are very glad you remembered us, your comrades in God's army. And you may always count on us to remember you, our comrade in Uncle Sam's army." Very interesting. We'll go on to the next slide.
Sharon?
Okay,
Sharon.
this is a soldier letter. Private Oscar Hall was from the church as well. And this is very interesting, and it kind of points up what you're going to see next week when Dr. Nevergold talks about Mr. Smitherman. The soldiers always wanted to hear news from home. And in this particular letter, this soldier, Private Oscar Hall, is asking for any news or newspaper from Buffalo. He mentions that he sends him the Buffalo Star or any colored paper that is printed in Buffalo. Now, the Buffalo Star was printed by Mr. Smitherman, A.J. Smitherman, who was a newspaper man who had fled Tulsa, Oklahoma in the 1921 Tulsa Massacre. He ended up in Buffalo and began publishing another newspaper called the Buffalo Star. He was friends with Reverend Nash, and Mr. Smitherman wrote poetry and other columns as well. And Reverend Nash talked to Mr. Smitherman to try to make sure that he could send newspapers of the Buffalo Star to the soldiers who was requesting information from at home.
So I believe this is a photo of Private Oscar Hall, as you can see. Hopefully everyone can see that.
And this is just another example of one of the letters of recommendation that Reverend Nash would write for the soldiers as well.
Mm-hmm. We have another letter, let me see. Another correspondence between Sergeant Alford and Reverend Nash here.
Let me say, as we're looking at some of the photographs that were in the collection, there was no identification on them. Some had handwritten notes on the top as to who they were, or there might have been something on the back of the photograph, but all the photographs were saved even though they were not all identified. But as you can tell, most of the soldiers in the platoons are African American. It's only the commanders were white.
Okay.
Yeah.
You want to take your word? Which one is that?
This is Private Oscar Hall. We have another correspondence. Yeah.
So in this one, I think Pastor or Reverend Nash gives a lot of updates about what has been happening in the church. The third Sunday in this month, we are planning to reopen our young people's work for the season. We are planning to have Reverend Charles Body of Rochester, New York, come and give the address. I'm very glad to believe that you will be with us in spirit. Things in general in Buffalo and in our church move on about as usual. Every now and then a soldier comes and takes away one of our girls, but he leaves a $5 bill with the fortunate preacher. I think you will remember Mrs. Body Anderson, who was very sick here last spring. She went south and returned the other day looking fine and is getting very well, so that she can attend church services and other church functions. I hope you will get much satisfaction from reading your Buffalo Star when it comes. Mrs. Nash and Jesse wish to be remembered to you. Write when you can. I am as ever your pastor, Reverend Nash. So it shows that he was as good as his word, and he sent Private Oscar Hall the Buffalo Star. And again, I think just the everydayness of the letters stands out, because that was the kind of information that the soldiers wanted. They wanted to feel connected. And you notice that in very few of the letters did they ever complain about any of things that were happening to them at that time. They just, again, wanted to just know what was going on and feel connected to their community.
Yes. And it's so amazing that we have these lovely pictures preserved. Just incredible. You can see that these brothers here, they had each other, but they also had, across thousands of miles, Reverend Nash and the entire community of the church behind them, which I think is just so incredible. And as we move along, there'll be another letter that I'd like to touch base on as well. We have another letter. Some of these are a little bit harder to read for us than most, but Sharon, is there anything you'd like to jump in and say?
I just want to emphasize how important it was that Reverend Nash kept this correspondence. Because he kept this correspondence, we're able to see another light into what was going on, not just in Buffalo, but throughout the nation, from soldiers who have been sent to war. So, and it also goes to show that he didn't just write soldiers. As I mentioned earlier, he got letters from parishioners who went on vacation, and they were telling him how much they liked where they were or how much they missed the service. And it seems like he always had time to write back and reply to the letters that he had received. And as you can see, most of these are typewritten, probably on the X typewriter that is still in his office at the Nash House Museum, was where he would make his copies and write his correspondence.
Yes, and I really encourage everyone that's here, if you haven't been to the Nash House Museum, please go and see his library. We're very familiar with it at the church, and it's just really incredible to touch history, not touch it, but be in the surrounding nature of it. It's really awesome. So please come visit and visit the church as well. For this slide here, I thought it was incredible. It seems as though they are welcoming back a soldier and a congregant here. And Reverend Nash writes, "My dear Brother Bodie, we are more than pleased to know that you will be with us on Sunday, September 19th. We are arranging to have our evening service combined with our young people's meeting, starting at 6:30 and be through for the day at 8:30. We are looking forward to having an inspiring, helpful time, and we hope it may be the end of a perfect day for you. If you are planning to arrive on the train, please let me know over what road and the exact hour you will arrive so that we may meet you. Or if you are driving, you may come right to the church, 511 Michigan Avenue. With kindest regards, I am very truly yours, Reverend Nash." Yes. This photo is entitled "Rest in the Desert." You can see that we're resting.
There was one other letter that we don't have it in the slide presentation, but it really was impactful for me reading this. I think this may have been from Larry Wilcox, and he was serving in Okinawa. So the war ended, peace was declared on September 2nd, 1945, and the letter is dated September 10th, 1945, and he's writing to Mrs. Nash. So he talks about being in Okinawa and the area, seeing the Japanese planes overhead. And then he says, "If I can make any predictions from past experience, I doubt very much if we will be here much longer. In fact, we did board a ship a short time ago for Japan, but a sudden change in orders is holding us here temporarily. While I'm eager to come home, I am hopeful of seeing Tokyo first. That has been a 29-month desire of mine. The company in general seem to have the same wish.
It is. Oh, goody.
I received letters regularly from several hometown fellows who are over here. The sad part of it is that I have yet to meet any of them personally. Lieutenant James Bell, Sergeant Needham Lee, and Sergeant James Sesson. Captain Alan Howard keep tabs on things down in New Guinea. Though we are scattered all over the theater, we have summed up our predicaments by promising to have an early reunion somewhere in the Buffalo area, such as Michigan Avenue Church, Dan Montgomery's. I mean down at the Y, smile, because Dan Montgomery was a place that maybe Mrs. Nash wouldn't want the boys to be. He said maybe they'll meet up at the Y instead, or some such respectable meeting place. I believe I will be able to keep my part of the bargain at an early date, for I am fortunate in having a score of 96. Placement of when you go home, all gotten without a wife or child. So when the overseas officers are being released, I should be among the early returnees. Taking an even larger number in general, I feel that most of us will be home to celebrate Christmas, with the others being able to do so by Easter. It is needless for me to inquire of your feelings concerning the ending of the war. Furthermore, it is useless for me to make any attempt toward expressing mine. While we all played a diversified part toward making victory possible, I am unsure, may be different. I am sure we are unanimous in our joy that it is now over. Our words and actions of emotions may be different, but it summarizes to the words that we are happy to be alive and see it through. With us here, the days and the nights that come while the war is over cry was still a rumor had its effects. 1 minute, a war is over, followed with Jap bombers coming over and drop a few bombs. Later on, we may be giving last-minute instructions to the men concerning the protection against gas attack. At one time, it was fearful that the Japs would use gas as a last resort. While some radio may be blasting out the news that it was a matter of hours before the Japs would accept. Such was some of the confusions that prevailed these last few days. It was then that I realized that the many war movies I saw had one false scene. Wars do not end suddenly with the coming of a message to the front lines with the good news. Nor does it end suddenly, whereby soldiers in the field can celebrate. No, such things I find happen only in the movies. The end of war is a slow process that includes rumors and truth, hopes and failures, false happiness and disappointment, and in more cases than one, it includes needless death of individuals. The end of a war, the coming of peace, the complete cycle, is like watching the struggle of the dawn breaking through the darkness of the night to slowly bring forth the break of day to a waiting world. From reports I have received from the home front, I understand that you and the family have just returned from your vacation, and hoping that it was enjoyed by all. And then he says, seriously though, Mrs. Nash, I'm thankful for living and seeing this thing through. To know that I've played an active part and did the same well up to the present time gives me a feeling of satisfaction for my life work for the past 4 years. My present wish is to be able to return there at an early date and thank the person, those few like my family, Mrs. Letchworth, Mrs. Alexander, and others, for their part in words and deeds they have shown to me the past 49 months. Regards to Reverend Nash, and tell him he may scan the pages for no more than 1 minute if he thinks this letter is not at the level. Smiles. Tell Jesse hello, we'll see him shortly, I hope. Smiles. Kindly give my regards to the church, but that doesn't mean reading this letter. I'm sorry, Larry, but we had to read this letter.
Yeah,
So Reverend Nash was also known to scrutinize their work and make sure that everything was perfect before they were shared with the church members. So they were always on there making sure that they were writing their very best presenting of themselves. But I thought that was powerful, the way he described sort of the end of the war and that passage about the time. And again, the names he mentioned, those were some of the members of the church that he was keeping up with and keeping up with him. So that connection really just carried them all the way through.
Sharon, would you like to add anything to that before we head into questions?
No, I'd be happy to hear some comments and questions from the audience, those online or those present.
Does anyone here in the audience have a question? I have a mic for our listeners.
This is my mother, Diana Henderson here, Bishop Henderson's wife. It's not so
This
much
is-
a question.
This is Reverend Nixon. Hello? Oh, I'm sorry. Go.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just, you know what, it's so heart moving to just hear and to see how Dr. Nash was so connected, integrated entwined with the community and our soldiers. Served 4.5 years in the United States Army. And it's nothing like being away from family, friends, and etc. And not to be, and you feel disconnected. And of course my family responded, but when it comes to the ecclesiastical clergy being involved and connected, it makes a difference. I think Dr. Nash was ahead of his time. Because if we look today, you may hear of our soldiers, men and women, going into the military, but you don't see or hear too much of the follow-up. So I think if the church can really conceptualize something like this, maybe perhaps there will be more interaction, leadership in the forefront of the church to really hone in or connect with our warrior soldiers on the front line. And we're living in a different world today, so it's different because you have women in the front line today too. So this was excellent, and I want to say thank you so much.
Good evening.
I forgot how many men, how many, were there any women from the church that went from the church? You know?
Sharon, was there, you had mentioned this about women. Were there any women from the church? Do we have any of their names?
I didn't see any correspondence yet, but I haven't been through all of the letters, and I did not see any photographs either. We do know there was one woman from Buffalo who was part of that mail delivery system, and they just getting ready to rename the post office off of Amherst Street in her honor. I cannot think of her name right now, but there were women involved, drafted. Yes.
Were there any casualties? Any men not returned?
That I don't think that we're clear on. You hear that question, Sharon? Were there any casualties from the church that we know about?
None were mentioned so far in the letters that I've seen.
Yes.
We have a question on Zoom asking if any of the soldiers are still alive today, knowing that they're probably in their 90s if they are. Does anyone know if they're alive? Sharon, do you have?
Do I know if any of the soldiers are alive today? I'm not sure. I know Mr. Paul Woods is alive. He'll be turning 100 this year. And I know that he served in the service, but I'm not sure, when. He is a member of the American Legion, of some of the, I think he's part of the Jesse Clipper Post. So we do know something about him, but I don't have the detail of his life, but he did serve.
Do you have any other questions?
I got a quick comment. You mentioned Paul Woods, but there is a gentleman who's alive. I think his name is Clarence Brown, who's child with one of his sons, and he's will be 102 this year. Matter of fact, he was written up in Buffalo News.
Thank you for sharing. Anybody else? Come to you. So we'll let Sharon talk about where the Nash House is in the museum. The church is on Michigan Avenue at 511 Michigan Avenue. It's a red brick church, so you can't miss it. Once you enter the African American Heritage Corridor, you'll see the archway. But Sharon, why don't you share with them where the Nash House is located?
Right. The Nash House is located at 36 Nash Street. And Nash Street is a street that runs parallel to Michigan. In fact, it's in front of the city garage. It's a short street that runs between Broadway and William. The Nash family did not move into that house at 36 Nash Street until 1925. And although Reverend Nash came to Buffalo to pastor the church in 1892, he lived in other residences until he got married in 1925 to Miss Frances Jackson, and they moved into the house at 36 Nash Street. We had a presentation last year about Jesse Clipper, and it was ironic for me to find out that Jesse Clipper lived on Potter Street, which it was called before it was named Nash. And you know, Jesse Clipper was a soldier from World War I, and there's a monument dedicated to him in the corner of Michigan and William Street. So I'm sure that Nash knew of Jesse Clipper. That would have been during the time when he was in Buffalo.
Yes, awesome. Thank you, Sharon, so much. And also, if you do want to book a tour for our Zoom members and our audience here, you can go to michiganstreetbuffalo.org. Again, the website is michiganstreetbuffalo.org. So please head over and book a tour with us. We'd love to see your families and your faces there. I have another question over here. I guess this is really for Sharon because she stated it tonight and I've heard it before. And maybe the answer is obvious, but whenever I hear it, I think of all different reasons. When the veterans came back and they were in uniform, they would get harassed and beaten up by the whites. So Sharon, is there something like that's written that somebody said why they did it, or did they just do it for the reasons that are probably in my head and everything? And
it was just part of the discrimination that was taking place in the country. Many whites who saw soldiers come back in their uniform kind of thought that the soldiers were, out of place. Like you have no business wearing this uniform. I mean, remember that this was a very segregated country. And so for a soldier to come back saying that I have fought for this country, I come back, I cannot ride public transportation, I cannot vote, I can't get a job in these places, and to show the uniform was kind of like an insult to many people. And soldiers were murdered because they had their uniforms on, and nothing was done about it. So in any of the books that you read about African Americans in World War II, you'll see the double-edged sword that these men and women had to live. That double victory was started by the Chicago Defender newspaper. We need two victories, one at home and one abroad. They were not able to get GI loans, buy housing. So things were not very good for the majority of the soldiers who came back.
Yeah. Okay, we'll get right to our Zoom question following this question here in person.
This is a question, I believe, to Sharon, and to clarify. I heard a statement, I can't even remember who said this, but some information I didn't know about was the African American nurses that were involved in the war and caring for German soldiers. And I just thought that struck me as one of the most ironic and sad things, to be actually nursing, ultimate kind of oppressor for how you live your life and how do you think of yourself. Can you elaborate a little bit more on, I guess, the historic nature of those interactions and where were they taking place more so as prisoners of war in Europe, or they more captured individuals that may have been prisoners of war detained in America? I just would like some more information.
They would have been prisoners of war overseas. And of course, most African American men and women had, what do you call, support jobs in the war. Like many of the soldiers who were captured were treated better than the African American soldiers who were in the Army for the U.S. They got better food. They were housed in better condition. They had better clothing, to where it seemed like they had more protection of their rights than the African American soldiers who were there. There are some books that have been written on African American women and nurses and WWIIs in the armed services. And I'm not an expert and able to elaborate on it, but these are just some of the things that I've read generally about World War II, blacks in World War II. And I guess I get some information. My father was a veteran of World War II. Of course, when I was young, I didn't want to hear this stuff. He tried to sit down and tell me things and show me pictures, and I'm like, oh, God, not again. I'm tired of World War II. But now I wish I had paid attention. But the things he said about, and I used to hear this, they said women overseas were told that black men had tails. I was like, who said that? I'm thinking, and then I began to read, and that was one way that the white soldiers would try to dissuade the women overseas from communicating and talking to black soldiers. So they depicted them as some kind of strange animals with tails and, as not as human beings. To try to keep them apart.
This is incredibly heart-wrenching to hear that, Sharon. I mean, to feel less than human, it's just like, and you're fighting for a country, for freedom, and for your country, so to speak. So sad. But you know what? We're going to actually close off with this last two questions from a Reverend Samuel Dixon Jr. on the Zoom. The first question is, did any of the family members of the soldiers do any presentations of their family members to our knowledge? Are we aware of any of that? I know we kind of touched base on that previous question. Sharon, do you have any info on that?
Any information on families of the soldiers that we read the letters from?
Yes. Did any of those family members, yes.
Did any, I'm sorry, I can't hear the question.
I can clarify if it's helpful.
Yes.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for the presentation. I was just checking to see if any of the family members of the soldiers, to your knowledge, have done any presentations either within the communities or to the, or publicly that you are aware of, where they've actually told the story or stories of their members from their perspectives there.
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
I do know that some of the members of the Jesse Clipper Club and some of the other veteran units have started to try to collect stories of veterans of the wars. I'm not sure if they just World War II or, soldiers from more current wars, but they are trying to collect some of these stories of soldiers who have served.
Okay, no, I appreciate that. And the other quick question is, did the church or any of the churches do any special programs in honor of the soldiers and their families, either during the times that those soldiers were in service at the time or after they did return at some point? Is there any documented activity of that. I'm asking, I had served with the Eyes on the Prize team for the production we did of that, and so I'm very interested in hearing these things that have been captured. So I'm wondering if there's any documented kind of capturing of special programs or services or any kind of thing that the churches have done during that time or after they returned to the States there.
Well, I know the one letter that was read where Reverend Nash talked about we're going to have this special service, and we can pick you up and bring you here, and we're going to celebrate your return. So I think Michigan Street Baptist Church did celebrate those soldiers and their families when they returned from the war. They had the one committee that was in contact with the soldiers and make sure that they sent cookies and letters and they posted letters and pictures on the bulletin board trying to be aware of who was in the service. So we do have that documentation that it was done at Michigan Street Baptist Church. I don't have the documentation for other churches.
Okay. Thank you, because that's important. The programs or what took place that day when they did it. I was just wondering if that is available to see what the actual program was and who spoke and what the context of that program was there.
We'll keep looking. We got lots of archives to go through.
I understand.
Reverend Nash threw nothing out. He kept it all.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you very much for sharing. This has been a very informative piece there. Blessings to you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor Nixon. So we have a question here. It says, did some of the soldiers write about discrimination in the military? Have we found any correspondence such as that yet, Sharon?
Not yet.
Okay.
But I can't say that any of them did not, but I have not seen that yet.
All right. And then before we close, there was one question, is the church the oldest church in Buffalo? No, it's not. But as mentioned, it is 172 years old, but we encourage you to book a tour and come stop by and see it yourself.
And it is the oldest church built by and for African Americans. There were two other congregations at the time when Michigan Street got going, but this church, Michigan Street Baptist Church, is the only structure we have that was built by and for African Americans.
Right. I think the oldest church congregation might be what we now call Bethel AME Church, which was formerly Vine Street AME Church.
Right. Thank you, Sharon. So at this time, we are going to close our program. Are there any closing words from Lillie or Sharon before we end the evening?
One thing for me, I think these letters were just really impactful. And the question we said about, did the soldiers write about discrimination in the military? To me, I think the subtext to all of these was the fact that they were all just doing their duty. And that's not something, again, that was new for us. And to me, it also says just how much, I think, sort of faith they had and there was also some things that I read that said when the soldiers came back, they kind of kickstarted the civil rights movement because their experiences, I think, being abroad and seeing the differences in the freedom that they had to be treated by other groups of people, they really started becoming active. And I think that's another reason why there was the violence against them, because when you were in those kinds of situations, I think you probably came back with a sense of you're just going to confront this, and they started doing those things. I think the shameful part about their experience was the opportunities to secure a future for their families was denied because Black soldiers could not they were not able to take advantage of the GI Bill. They were not able to take advantage. They could not get the low loans to purchase homes. And all the position that America found itself in during those years when we were the richest country, because we were the only one that was still left kind of with an infrastructure. all of that momentum that really helped to propel and create a middle class was denied those soldiers who in many cases performed bravery above and beyond that really also in battle in situations that helped to secure the victory. Just the example of that tank unit that served for 183 days at the Battle of the Bulge, when the normal amount of time that the tanks ran through was like 2 weeks, but they served much more than that and were fearless in what they did. That is the shameful part of the legacy, is that those opportunities to really to advance your family for the sacrifice they made was denied. And we still live with the lingering impacts of that to this day. And yet, when you read those letters, I don't think in the ones that we've come across that any of them say or complain about the treatment, about their conditions. And in some cases, they were treated much more poorly than the German prisoners of war. But there is no complaint about that. It's just, kind of sticking in there and doing what they need to do. And the other thing to me is the commonality that during war, we are all Americans. They were there just like everyone else, trying to, fight for their country. And you hear that sentiment expressed from Reverend Nash to them sometimes too, that they are just one doing their duty.
Wow, it's incredible. So before we end it all, I just want to talk about our next topic of conversation in the series here at the library.
Okay, Dr. Peggy has her hand up.
Oh, okay, Dr. Peggy. Go right ahead, you can ask your question. You're on mute.
You're muted. Okay.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Mm-hmm.
Great. Thank you so much for this presentation. It's extraordinary. And it really points out there's so much more work to do in terms of understanding what happened to the Black soldier, especially when he came home after World War I. There was a whole group of them called it was the wonderful 24th out of Houston, Texas. And when they returned from the war, they were met with white men with rifles who said, you niggas think that you can come back here and take over now that you went to the war, but nothing's going to change. Still discrimination, still segregation, still can't use our toilets, still can't drink water from the same fountains. And the President of the United States, Woodrow Wilson, okayed all of that. And the 24th was then shot down, many of them like dogs in Houston, Texas, when they returned. And in addition to that, they were found guilty, and a great number of them were executed after that fallout in Texas. And there were Black men who were in the trenches, and it's something else we haven't looked at, I don't believe, and that is that these Black men in the trenches wrote for various newspapers. So I wondered if any of their letters made the newspapers in Buffalo. Certainly they made it out of, in Texas, they also made it out of Oklahoma. So there was an extraordinary world of things swirling around these Black men who had put their lives on the line. And one particular was Irvin Dungy, who was writing out of Oklahoma. And he sent newspaper columns home from the trenches to be published. And so I just wondered if any of these soldiers had done that, and if the Buffalo Courier or any of those papers that were present at the time picked up any of their stories as well. But this is just an extraordinary piece of work, and there's much to be done, but it's just wonderful. So glad to have been able to make it in time to get a question out there. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome, Dr. Peggy. So I know that your question was, did any of the articles make it into the local Black newspapers? Is that correct, from the soldiers at war?
Yes.
Sharon, do you have any knowledge of that?
I'm not sure, because I have not seen all of the existing issues left from the Buffalo Star. Since he was sending the papers there, some of them might have written to him, but we would have to examine that, and I'm sure Dr. Nevergold and you too, Dr. Bertram, might have a little more insight on to what A.J. Smitherman was able to publish.
Yeah. Well, I do know for sure that Irving Dungy, the whole time that he was in the service, that he wrote articles for the Oklahoma Black Dispatch, and they were taken and they were published every week.
Okay.
Okay, so before everyone heads out, we have our next lecture series next Tuesday, February 14th. Dr. Barbara Nevigold, co-founder of the Underground Queens Institute, tells the little-known story of Andrew J. Slenderman, a newspaper publisher who was a survivor and a major figure in the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre. After fleeing to Buffalo, he established the Empire Star, a Black community newspaper. So we encourage you all to come back out again, even our Zoom members, if you can make it again, please join us next week, the same time, 6 p.m., and we look forward to seeing you all then. Thank you so much.